Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salam, hello, peace to you all. I'm Adnan Hussein, and welcome to another edition, the 19th edition. We're getting close to a round number of 20. The 19th edition of Iran versus the Epstein Empire, or we could also go with the alternative title as the Ramadan War became very quickly a regional war, and we could talk about it as the axis of resistance versus the axis of Epstein. This episode is titled Escalation Dominance, in reference to some recent events. And I'm sure we're going to talk about those and many other things. But here to join me in this wonderful collaborative live stream, as ever, are the co-hosts of Resistance is Fertile podcast. You can see Benji there. Benji, great to see you. And of course, Indi is, he's here. Hopefully we'll hear him.
I'm back.
Excellent. Indi, it's great to have you wherever you are, in whatever shape your audio visual is in. We're going to benefit from your presence. Thank you for joining. It's great to see you. In addition, though, we have a special guest, first timer on the series, Kumars Salehi, who is well known, I'm sure, to many of you as co-host of Delete Your Account podcast, a long-running and excellent podcast. In his other life, outside of online media, he is visiting assistant professor of German literature, culture, and philosophy, specializing in philosophy, has been teaching at the University of Pittsburgh, and we've collaborated. I'm not sure what our collaboration is called. It used to be called The Four Doctors, just internally, but not the kind our parents really wanted us to be. And I think
it was a long title. It was too long, really.
It was too long. What are we now? I don't know what we are now. I mean, what's our Telegram channel?
Well, we've been calling the series. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I first time, long time for the Resistance is Fertile guys. I love what you guys are doing, and we've been calling it the Iran War Diary, sort of.
Yes, right.
As a fluke, almost. I think Sina was like, "Hey, you should post like a sort of a diary entry." I think to Naveed at some point, and then we were like, "Why don't we just call these an Iran War Diary?" I'm usually the one who's more intent with like peppering Naveed about like with questions about what's actually going on there. And Sina sometimes is, places a higher priority on expressing himself. Let's just put it that way. But we managed to get some good questions and occasionally. And those are really good episodes also. And my first kind of foray into YouTubing, really. So who knows also what might come of this. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to join you guys.
Oh, that's been a lot of fun. So we've done like 2 or 3 of those, and hopefully we'll continue to do those. But it's great to welcome you on to this panel and this quartet. And there's so much to discuss and talk about. So maybe we need to get right into it. But I just want to say before we do, just remember to like the stream, share it. If you're on X, you can retweet it. You can share the link on social media, and do subscribe to my channel, to @Indications, and also go and find Resistance is Fertile on Substack. You can find Delete Your Account as a podcast. So on any of the major podcast platforms, you should go there, rate, review, subscribe as well. And also, just as usual, we're doing a fundraiser. In this case, we're continuing with Dahnun Mutual Aid in Gaza. And I think recently I told you all a little bit about their important work providing water, fresh water, potable water, and also, of course, cash assistance to families in Gaza. So the link is in the chat. It'll be in the video description, and I'll periodically post it as well. Their Instagram link, where you can find out how they're using the funds and who they're supporting and helping. So do be generous. So with that out of the way, I'll remind you at points, why don't we come to, what's been happening? I think there's a lot of places we could start, but I think given the title being Escalation Dominance, a number of people noticed that in the U.S. attack on a radar facility on Qasem Island that was used by Iran as part of its management of passage through the Strait of Hormuz and the infrastructure and the system that they've put in place. It was an attack on that. It's clearly an attempt by the U.S. to try and dismantle, test Iranian control and management of the strait, because they have recently developed a kind of new agency or corporation or some kind of entity with Oman to manage the strait together. And Iran responded very quickly and very decisively, not in a kind of reciprocal manner, and not in the sort of strategic patience sort of vein of the past, but with attacks on 3 U.S. military installations and bases, 2 in Kuwait, 1 in Bahrain. And of course, the Kuwait International Airport was hit, and there was some kind of attempt to characterize that as a target of Iran. But there were clarifications and statements from IRGC saying that it hadn't been a direct target, but that it might have been, in fact, actually either misfiring or the consequences of interceptor missiles, doing damage. And we saw that happening in the first weeks of the war when U.S. Army personnel, CIA and Mossad agents that Iranian intelligence identified were off of U.S. bases and in civilian, hotels and apartment buildings, and Iran very precisely attacked those. That in many cases, damage that was done to other civilian installations and so on were because of the misfiring or the actual hits by some of the interceptor installations that, of course, were then evacuated out of the Gulf countries to, relocate them closer to Israel so that they could, support Israel rather than actually defend the GCC countries. So that's a plausible sort of story, and that's where we stand. But some of the commentators who have talked about this said this was clearly a step on the escalation ladder and an attempt by Iran to demonstrate that it was not going to tolerate this long attenuated kind of tit for tat, eroding of, Iran's position, and that it didn't, it wanted to actually demonstrate a kind of powerful capability, and also that it had dominance over the escalation, because we see what the reaction to the U.S. was, not to match that or go further, but in fact actually to continue negotiations and so forth. So I'm wondering what you think about this and about the analysis. I heard Trita Parsi kind of, after concluding that this was the case, then putting forward some kind of, as he always does, some kind of like qualms about, whether this strategy by Iran might lead to kind of dangerous escalation, and, maybe there might be miscalculations, and you never know, like that we need, like, people to come back to negotiations. So he's always, he can both recognize to some extent what's happening, but then he also takes this sort of position that this could be a dangerous step, that a dangerous game that Iran is now playing by, changing the terms of engagement and encounter. So anyway, I just wanted to open up. That's kind of where we are on the cusp of potentially this opening up to wider hot war, and, what you all think about this and about the sorts of analyses we're hearing about what this might mean or portend.
If I may start, I just want to, someone in the comments is saying that Kumars is low-key, looking like Loki, and it reminds me that we actually borrowed our podcast name "Resistance is Fertile" from Loki himself.
Oh wow! I didn't know that. That's interesting.
My first idea was sifting through the rubble, but then Brother
That's
Sasha.
depressing.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they told me. Brother Sasha said, no, that's not good, and you should use this. Resistance is fertile, that I heard Loki say. And by the way, Brother Sasha is 50 years old tomorrow.
Birthday,
and so
son.
we've been doing little videos to wish him happy birthday. As I know he watches our episodes, I just want to say very happy birthday, Brother Sasha. Thank you for your courage in our psychology association. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for starting me on that weird, wonderful world of podcasting, anti-imperialist yapping on the internet. And yeah, speaking of which, I think it was in this show that I mentioned the strategy I had used eventually to write the books I wrote, which was to commit to a number of words per day and send money, or get a good friend to send money to the Zionist terror gangs, or one of their, infinite number of charities, if I didn't fill in my commitments. So thanks to Milikovsky and his gang, I've been writing, absolutely 500 years a day on average, if not more, for I don't know how long now, but words are piling up, maybe not all of very high quality, but I can see my ideas coming along. So, and I've also been working on my Mandarin a lot, because going to China for 5 weeks this summer. So I've kept away a little bit from the news, and that's why I'm just talking personal stuff. But that will also keep me away from all the kind of, if I ran type of commentary, which, makes me reach. I think, was it Goering who said, every time I hear the word culture, I reach for my handgun. And every time I hear, people in the global north wanting to give advice to those who actually pay their resistance in the blood, in their own blood, in the blood of their families, in their hospitals, in their schools, in their infrastructure, it would make me reach for my gun if I was a gun owner. Thankfully, I only have bananas.
Yeah, I'll at least offer my surface reading of Trita's sort of tightrope that he walks. And in this case also, I think this is roughly accurate, which is that, like, what liberals and also I think maybe conservatives, others that might be somewhat swayable by the sort of think tank diplomacy politics of NIAC and the Quincy Institute, et cetera, I would probably characterize this as something that's not unique to them, but like pretty broadly, like the anti-war movement, rather than being anti-imperialist in a lot of cases, is more a sort of pacifist movement, really, based on the idea that like military solutions aren't solutions. And one thing that we're seeing now that I think people have such a hard time accepting is that there's probably primarily a military solution to the problems of colonization and imperialism that we've been trying to lobby our politicians over, and hoping that people in the West are going to be able to, sort of rise up. I was a lot more naive, I think, when I was doing Students for Justice in Palestine activism, and I don't want to take anything away also from the many young people who did far braver things and put their lives on the line a lot more than like 10 years before when things weren't quite as hot. But I think that kind of what we have seen is that that's not going to be the main thing. Just like in every other scenario of decolonization where we've actually seen structural change, land reform, real decolonization, not like imperial partition, it's also had this key military component. Obviously you guys can think of examples like in Southern Africa. In this case, I think what we're seeing is that we had our chance to enact this sort of Western savior narrative and come to our senses. What I think I didn't understand back then is that like people in these countries, the West, probably my view is skewed towards America, but like I have some knowledge of Germany and, roughly familiar with a lot of other Western societies, I think that there's this like pathological need to underestimate the alternatives to our way of understanding the world, even our way of life and understanding ideas like modernity, secularism, etc. I really think that this sort of hedging that you see with Trita it comes from a strategy, but it also comes from the audience that you're playing to, which is people that simply will not believe you if you tell them that Iran is a capable, rational actor. They will say, that's obviously not true. Even if they themselves, especially actually, if they themselves say, as they said for years and years before we actually saw some of these MIRVs or, whatever the acronym is, right? These incredibly sophisticated, it's reductive to call them cluster munitions, incredible technical engineering expertise. People were like, they couldn't possibly have something like this, right? They couldn't possibly have effective air defenses. And I think we can talk about Islamophobia and the role of Islam. I think that's a big part of it, actually. But in the case of the think tank world and the kind of analysis that tries to present itself as objective by hedging against Iran, it's just been invalidated, I think, at every turn since the new year, since the beginning of the Ramadan war. And that's generally the bent that I see Trita's analysis also taking. And I should also say that, Trita is obviously sort of like a main character in the transatlantic, in the global Iranian diaspora discourse. And so I tend to think he gets a lot of shit. Like, I think he catches a lot of strays even that he doesn't deserve. But I'm just using him as an example. He's far from the worst by any stretch of the imagination. We could talk about really bad diaspora Iranian takes. But I do think that this sense of almost like an inability to accept that somebody else might be able to do modernity better than you, or to reject the definitions of modernity and still be effective at war and at economic resilience and at geopolitical maneuvering. I think that this is a paradigm that's probably going to take even longer to shift than the actual economic and structural power relations.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you could say that that shift might already have happened, maybe, even 5-10 years ago, like very evident and possible to see. I mean, my consciousness of China as a great power, it's like when they had the Beijing Olympics, I was like, okay, it's over, West, like it's done. Like China is here, and that was like what, close to 20 years ago. But like these kind of habits of mind and ideology, they're slower in some ways to change than material reality. And maybe that's exactly what we're doing, is the lingering kind of sense that it's not reasonable to talk like that to the audiences that he's communicating to, which of course his audience is really sort of NPR listeners, some of the kind of soft left major online kind of shows where he provides a kind of counterpoint to the rah-rah American kind of military aggression that is hopelessly, discredited. So he provides a kind of alternative. Anyway, Indi, it seems like maybe you had something to come in on this.
Yeah. So let me know if you can hear me. I'm on the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, you're pretty good.
So, okay, fine. So I don't know who the Street of Farsi guy is, and I think people within the Western world are pretty irrelevant to their own democracies, let alone whatever is happening in the Strait of Hormuz. What I say is that the first battle of the Strait of Hormuz is over, and Iran took it. If America wants to take it back, that's a whole other battle they need to do. And what Iran is showing is that what they're basically asking is you and what army. So when America tries to do some provocations, which is honestly kind of petty terrorism, then Iran hits back by hitting Kuwait and Bahrain. And what they say in what Fotra says in his reports is that they're hitting the remnants of the Fifth Fleet base in Bahrain, as in they don't have basing structures to do anything, to start anything. I mean, as Michael Jackson said, want to be starting something. Like maybe they want to be starting something, but they don't have the basing for it. And they're still skulking around the Indian Ocean, and they don't have the technology for it. as I think Kumars was saying, or someone, it's introductive to call what Iran has cluster missiles. This is highly sophisticated. You can maybe call them MIRV, multiple independent re-entry vehicles. But
Yeah,
these
that's
are,
it.
and hypersonics. These are things that the U.S. doesn't have. Yeah, and these are things that the U.S., with its current military strategy of aircraft and aircraft carrier, in my opinion, that's like riding horses into World War II. Like, when we explain to the future what like an F-35 is, I have to tell our grandkids, well, there were drones, but then you put a person on top of the drone, and then the drone costs, $200 million. And then people are like, what are you talking about? Like, it'll be the age of the Shahed. And then these guys are riding basically manned cavalry into it. So it's not their time and it's not their place. And I think commentators can talk, and America can do some petty terrorism here and there, but Hormuz still belongs where it belongs, to Iran. And all the commentators in the West, I'm like, bro,
Indi, can you try to move closer to your device?
Yeah, and I'll yell also, sorry. So
try
we're
to
talking
move
about
closer.
Axis of Epstein. The Epstein people are still running your damn country. Like, don't worry about Iran. No, I'll stop.
I wanted to also give an homage to the memory of Marjan Satrapi, who died this week in circumstances I didn't really understand, but I want to really, express my debt of gratitude to the fact that I read what Persepolis, when did that come out? Must have been in the 80s or something. And if I'm honest, I think I owe about 80% of my view of Iran as this backwards, patriarchal, violent, medieval, dark, black, depressing country in which everybody wants to commit suicide or to violently attack people for what they're wearing or what they're reading, to this lady. So thank you very much for nothing. I'm slowly trying to deprogram my mind from all the rubbish I got from that, and so richly supported by the French state. And, this person went on, she was on Democracy Now! 2 years ago to explain that the leader of the French left is a raging anti-Semite, is not even to the left of François Mitterrand, of the socialists in 1981. Right. She would do photo ops with one Bernard-Henri Lévy, enough said. And she just...
I saw something else that was, I don't remember the full context of the forum. It was some sort of like, democracy burning, Iran is burning for democracy or something. This is one of the great clips that people like Mikey have been posting on Twitter. And the substance of what she was saying was this was a couple of months after October 7th, and she was basically like, yeah, we have to fight Hamas, we have to fight the Islamic Republic because it's the only reason that you guys are going to be attacked, in sort of typical global war on terror fashion. I'll say this, I got that view of Iran from like just diaspora Iranian culture. So I wish that I could just localize it and thank her. She, I didn't even read the book because I don't like cartoons, frankly, but I sort of get the gist. And people assure me that it's not too anti-government, but like I've seen the pictures and I've actually read like sort of diaspora, like Gusano GDR literature that is also like in this same style, and there's a weird kind of like upper middle class cultural refugee comic book or graphic novel aesthetic that just kind of like doesn't interest me at all. It's sort of it's interesting actually how it cuts across national context, but the context in which I had seen her celebrated in, you could say, progressive circles was, I don't know where this quote comes from, but like there's a still that I saw got passed around on social media of I think the main character in Persepolis may be smoking a cigarette, and it's the quote I have here. It's, "The world is not divided between East and West. You are American. I am Iranian. We don't know each other, but we talk and we understand each other perfectly. The difference between you and your government is much bigger than the difference between you and me. And the difference between me and my government is much bigger than the difference between me and you. And our governments are very much the same." And then the quote at the bottom, the attribution is Marjane Satrapi, Iranian graphic novelist. And I didn't know a lot of this other stuff at first. So when I read this, I was like, well, at least it doesn't say Marjane Satrapi, Iranian political scientist. But it definitely has this simplicity to it, this childishness, frankly, that I think the native informant, to use a commonly used phrase, kind of has to perform. And obviously, I have no doubt that she fully believes this on some level. But that strikes me as also an obstacle to helping people understand the stakes. Like, if what she was, I think, assuming there or professing there is in any way rooted in reality, then maybe we would have actually been able to, as a Palestine solidarity movement, hey, Indi's back. Sorry, guys, I reconnected. No worries. Maybe if this idea of, people are the same everywhere and they all hate their terribly oppressive governments, and this kind of, it's a class blindness with regard to the global color line, with the regard to the real class divide that colonialism and imperialism are. And I think that the idea that there could actually be more in common ultimately between us and fucking Trump on some ideological level, maybe even on a material level, in terms of our relationship to this global class structure, then we have in common with somebody who is, of our same technical class status within the, relative to that given society in Iran. I think this is, call it what you will, liberalism, Trotskyism, whatever it is. I think that is is sort of, again, a prerequisite. This diplomatic conciliatory attitude is a prerequisite to appeasing this settler, this colonial consciousness that people will not let go of. You simply cannot get them, not in big enough numbers. God bless them. There are a lot of people that do good stuff, right? More than I will ever do. But on the whole, it seems like there's no real investment in decolonization in the third world, in the global south, because, and I don't think it's just because people haven't seen the right TikToks yet, right? Or read the right books. I think that there is a problem with the fact that we do benefit from the fact that there is global white supremacy and a sort of global Western hegemony. This is the reality of colonialism. And we are structurally conditioned to reject the violence of the oppressed. So, like, speaking of these NPR liberals, I could imagine a world, for example, where the idea that something called the axis of resistance, remember #the resistance, is fighting Trump. I could imagine a world in which we celebrated that the way that some liberals celebrated Ukrainian, honestly, now, like, just open attacks on civilians constantly, although you don't hear about that as much these days. But the amount of militarism, imagine, directed at Trump, it could have, it could have been another sort of rhetorical tool for them. A lot of these libs are like, let's not buy from Amazon because, I don't know, we want to go back to like small business capitalism or whatever, and buying stuff from Amish farms. And you tell them, hey, here's an organization, a political organization, has representation at the United Nations, in fact, that is bombing Amazon. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, why would you not be excited about that? And of course, the reason is because we identify with Amazon more than we identify with people who are presented as alien in this way, who we understand as irrational actors stuck in a previous century. And that's, again, I think, where the idea of maybe a unique utility in demonizing Islam as irrational also comes in. And that's something you guys obviously talk about a lot and know probably even more about than me.
Yeah, and if I may say a few more words on Marjan Satrapi, I think, the book itself is the story of a little girl caught in a revolution that she doesn't understand, and her parents are clearly middle class. Apparently, they were two-day supporters, and, they're not exactly down with the way things are turning, and she can't listen to punk records, music records or something like this, she says. But there is a particular arc of, I think, the diaspora intellectual in the West, and those are the ones that get cultivated and make a career out of it. And, the trajectory is broadly that of that famous North Korean defector, Yeon-mi Park, where you get into increasingly intense and exaggerated critique of your home country, because that is your meal ticket at the end of the day. There is also the other very infamous figure of the Muslim apostate Ayaan Hirsi Ali. That's right. So you get to this kind of thing where at the end of the day, in Iran, they make people they make women push trains in their burqa, and then they have to eat the burqas, and then the burqas eat themselves or something. I'm trying to the only Park school of, gradual exaggeration, but they fulfill an absolutely essential, jokes aside, ideological function in the West. Like, how many, even, people who are 89-90% on our side will use North Korea as the sign, or the mullah regime as this kind of signifier of the worst of the worst, even as a joke. Oh, you're not happy that I'm forcing you to do your homework. This isn't North Korea or the mullah regimes, or whatever. Or, I'm asking you to not go out at night in your whatever. And one thing that's very significant is when the axis of Epstein started illegally the aggression against the glorious Islamic Republic of Iran, you know what happened in France? French state television immediately saw it necessary to broadcast Marjan Satrapi's film version of a comic book, right? And now there is talk, and now she's presented this great left-wing conscience, and, the communist leanings of her parents are being put as a proof that she was, in fact, a very kosher left-wing Democrat. And they are now talking about putting that film and that book in the official syllabus of all French schools. So there is a very nefarious ideological function being served by this kind of stuff. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I don't know if you caught that, Indi. Obviously, you picked up that we're talking about Marjan Satrapi's Persepolis.
Yeah, so Iranian diaspora, I think, has taken the award for most cursed diaspora. And
I think so.
I join her. I think she's just sort of part of that. I know as a Sri Lankan, there's like NGOs, there's entire grants devoted to finding people who will just basically talk about how bad Sri Lanka is. And this happens like all over the world because they want to cultivate examples of like how bad different places are. So they have excuses to intervene there. And that's what she's sadly a part of. I saw something, because you can really tell what do people say about Gaza, right? You can talk about moral stories, you talk about the past, but about the present, that's sort of a litmus test. And what she said is a democratic Iran, which is of course white speak for, we put the Trojan horse of liberal democracy in to divide and conquer it. But she said a democratic Iran means a weaker Hamas. And it's like, bro, who are the ones? I think it's important to come back to the fact that there is a genocide convention, which Iran cites as well. It's not like an Islamic convention per se. And they say, well, we do this because of Islam, but also your own genocide convention says that if this is happening, it's a duty of nations to intervene. And Iran of nations is the only one that has fulfilled their duty in that regard.
And
you
Yemen.
can say like Yemen and Lebanon. Yeah, but I mean like fully functional nations, I guess, with a football team that can half travel to the World Cup. But Iran is the only one who's done their duty. And then you talk about including Persepolis in the education system. Dude, there's just a fundamental cultivation of ignorance, right? There's a cultivation of ignorance within these societies where you'll hear people in the West saying, "Oh, Allah is bad. I hate Allah." It's like, bro, like Allah is just the like Arabic word for God, the same God you worship. But there's and I know this because I grew up in the West, and I also didn't really engage or read Islam until this stuff started happening. But it's a completely coherent moral philosophy, and not just a philosophy; it's a completely coherent praxis. And people would do well to sort of learn from it rather than, I mean, with satrapi, it's just the whole. I saw something where they said like the veil, the image she uses of the veil, that alone communicates everything you need. That it's just an other, and you need to like strip it off and put it on OnlyFans, and that's civilization. And it isn't. I think Iran, like right now, an actual civilization is speaking, and you can listen to that civilization and the people of that civilization, and not to the people, not to the cursed diaspora. Not to say everyone in the Iranian diaspora is cursed, but I mean, if you look at it, a football team, I think they've kind of embarrassed themselves.
Yeah, this is. I was surprised by how much of a backlash against the critiques of satrapi, have been mobilized. Obviously, in this moment, you're not going to find, I think, a sympathetic audience for the legacy of satrapi and her Persepolis during the, horrific, illegal U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. And so to see some of the liberals who have been so outraged by the campist attacks on satrapi, it's really quite stunning to me. I mean, we're in the middle of imperialist war, and nobody in the West, besides, more than Azar Nafisi for reading Lolita in Iran, right? Marjan Satrapi's Persepolis conditioned the way people thought about Iran. And let's think about, the fact that it wasn't just a book, but it was a graphic novel. So it had these vivid images that could really stereotypically emblazon themselves upon people's imagination whenever they think about Iran. It contributed to this idea, something that Max Eil, people should read him on this kind of distinction between the people and their state, this whole ideology of constantly separating people from their government. Well, we all, of course, can be distinguished from our governments. That's not the point of the way this distinction is employed. It's meant to be the way in which you can wash imperialist violence, colonialist violence through the mechanism of identifying with the people, and being sympathetic to the people, and particularly in this case, washing through liberal imperialist feminism, the idea that we should be intervening to save Afghan women from, the burqa, and Iranian women from the veil, and so on. It's just so powerful in this Western self-aggrandizement that creates the conditions for intervention. So my problem with this is much less, Mikey posted like that clip. In fact, here we can show it. Mikey posted that clip of her on Democracy Now!, which has become a horrific show. Like, let's be honest. I mean, awful show.
Can you full screen it?
Maybe I can. How can I full screen it? I'm not sure.
You go to your Twitter window and you full screen.
Yeah, it's sort of on big, but maybe. I mean, I can full screen the
like
video.
this. Yeah, the video, yeah.
But, sure, I was really more interested in, and I don't really want to play it, but what she says in this is, these kind of anti-Mélenchon, right, statements, because he's pro-Putin. He's a Putin lover. So again, the whole Russophobic, Russian scaremongering about Russia. She says that he supported Chavez, like we're supposed to be upset that he supported the Bolivarian revolution that has lifted so many people out of poverty in Venezuela. And then she says, that he's an anti-Semite, and he's quiet about Hamas, implying that he is some kind of, he's some kind of like apologist, for Islamist terror, which is like the worst thing in the world that you could be in the global war on terror. And when did she publish this? It started in 2000, but it really, became a phenomenon at the very inception of the global war on terror and the Iraq war. And it was part of the Islamophobia industry, really. It is a part and parcel of the Islamophobia industry. And, so I think it's been actually very dangerous. And to my mind, the worst part of her legacy is not that she's a terrible political commentator and exposed herself for having no understanding of geopolitics. It is that absolutely every course in a college and university in the West, has as the representative for the Middle East, West Asia, Islamic world as part of liberal inclusion. Part of our globalizing and multicultural literature is that we include other literatures. But what do we include? We include this vicious account that lays the groundwork for imperialist Islamophobic violence. And that's the real problem, is that it's on absolutely every syllabus.
Brother, can you show the picture I put in? Because I want to say just two sentences about it, if I may.
Yeah.
So it was first published in 2000 in French. And look at those pictures. I mean, if the lady on the left was in a book about Jews, guess what? But what is most significant to me about this is it's that little girl, being oppressed by the adults. And so our image of Iran up until what was it, February the 20th or 28th was that, right? A society totally oppressive to little girls that wouldn't let little girls be little girls. And you know what this little girl's face has been replaced by?
And we have to do minab.
I was going to say, but it's actually the case that today that little girl's face has been replaced by all the victims of minab. And I think that is very significant. And this book is on its way to the dustbin of history because of that. Yeah. And it's very important to remember now. Picture this little girl as a student, as a little girl from Minab.
So as we talk about escalation dominance, the West used to have the moral high ground. If there's a battle, they used to at least claim and take the moral high ground. They used to say, we're doing these wars for women, we're doing it for human rights, we're doing it for democracy. But one thing they've lost in Gaza and Iran is the moral high ground completely. They can no longer say they're doing it for women when they're blowing up Minab, which is told as a girls' school, but I think there was actually more boys there. They can no longer say they're doing stuff for human rights when people see it violated daily in Gaza. And they can no longer say they're doing it for democracy when their figurehead for all this is like some washed up giant nose like monarch in Iran. Like we're going to reinstall monarchy in Iran. That's sort of the story they're spinning. What I say is in the West, it's like the Romans had the Colosseum. They have what I call the cable TV Colosseum, where every week or every month, some different nationality is trotted out, and there's good and bad, and you vote thumbs up or thumbs down, and the people watching think that they're doing something. But now it's been exposed as a farce. So it's not just the physical basis that they've lost in the Gulf, they've lost the moral basis to be there at all. And as you said, when this came out, it was a very different time. It was a very different time where this was accepted. And now, as she's died, she's honestly being condemned because it's a different time. The time has changed.
Yeah, great points and excellent point about the Minab, Benji. Yes. Sorry, I cut in on that because it was like just so great. But you're absolutely right. That is.
It was begging to be said, brother.
It was, as is like a pun that I wanted to use before, is that she was a satrap. Satrapy was a satrap for.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's I didn't even see that.
Somebody in the chat sort of beat me and said, "How is it that?"
His brother Hezbollah.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, so like, there's, this is an interesting topic because we started with Trita Parsi, who's probably like the most benign on the sort of, spectrum of this diasporic kind of, career. And this is the thing, is that the point is that there's, Edward Said mentioned it in, in his great book, Orientalism, that he had a chapter on Orientalism as career, where what he was talking about were people from the West who used the fact of Western power and dominance and the fact that they could go to the East and use their experience and their representation of the East for, fame, approbation, distinction, honor, etc., and make a career out of representing the East to the West. But what we've seen in the modern world is the recruiting of the westernized, the comprador elites into this, either who are in those societies and make their audience the gratifying of the West by portraying as native informants their society in the way that Indi was mentioning, that we have all these people who, who seem to make a career out of critiquing and criticizing everything in Sri Lanka as inadequate and poor and not as good as the West. And so you have this kind of class, but you also have the diasporic class because of the dislocations, immigration, particularly in the post-war period. And so there's a lot of people who are making a career out of representing the East through the lens of being the authentic, indigenous, native informant that can represent their society. But as somebody pointed out in the, in the chat as well, is that she left Iran before she could really have understood the politics and the culture in any sort of really deep way. And the childishness that Kumars, you were saying, is part of her way of portraying and representing. Well, it's no big mystery. Why is that she has a frozen kind of picture and understanding of Iran from the eyes of, a little girl in an upper middle class or upper class, westernized, secular, leftist, Marxist household that found itself sidelined by the revolution and had an image of how one should live the good life that couldn't be lived in Iran if it was authentically its own in this Islamic revolution. It could only be pursued in the West. And so obviously there's going to be this childish sort of comparison. What's remarkable and amazing is how successful she was in doing so. And because of exactly what Benji said, is that certain people are granted this. We know the political economy of the information war. If you give the empire what it desperately needs, cloaked in the sense of authenticity in this kind of like we are Benetton united colors of the world, sort of without really critiquing the class position of these people and their position vis-a-vis the empire, then it's possible to make a wonderful career, in the West, trafficking in Orientalism, racism, Islamophobia, you name it. So that's, I think, what we've seen with that. But what I wanted to say about this is that there's this whole class that we're talking about in a way. And there are other examples of it. Like I just was sent, an article by Vali Nasser and somebody else that appeared in Current Affairs.
Nagas Bajoli.
That's right. Yes. Okay. So this article is quite interesting because Current Affairs is a lefty kind of DSA, sometimes further left than DSA. They have good things. They have other things that may be less interesting. But, this is for a left audience. And you have Vali Nasser, talking about, what's going on in Iran. I don't know, Kumars, if you have read it, I mean, maybe you have some thoughts on it. But the main thing I just wanted to put to you and to others is that now this class recognizes that all of their previous, skepticism and undermining and belief that, of course, Iran is going to suffer tremendously because there's no way they could stand up to the United States and militarily, socially, politically, etc. They just won't be able to do it. And maybe this regime will fall, as they put it, or etc. But now they have to confront the fact and try and explain and conceptualize how it is that Iran has not only survived, but is now potentially thriving. I'm not going to say they haven't been damaged by this horrific violence and bombardment, but they are rebuilding right away. They're fixing their railroads and the bridges. They're still producing. They have underground facilities. They can still make their military kind of arms and so on. And so what's his explanation for this is like, oh, well, it's back to this neoliberal kind of like anti-ideology, because it could not be the ideology of the revolution that has infused and been embedded institutions and has been revived in this moment and proven to be correct, that you must have independent sovereignty. That's what history is demonstrating to the people of Iran, and they want to protect that. No, it cannot be the ideology of the revolution. It must be that there's this class that's been cleared out from those ideologues that have been kind of like, who are old and who were killed in these attacks. And now there's this like technocratic, generation.
That's very funny, because that's also what Trump says.
Yeah.
Right. He also said like there's been regime change because the new guys are like less fanatical, and then the next day he's like, we have to wipe out their civilization because they're so radical. It's all nonsense. I mean, I would, again, I would say that those two authors are also on the like less outrageous end of the spectrum a lot of the time.
Yes.
But again, they're catering to this Western mentality of, maybe we don't identify so much with Amazon, but we identify more with the lifestyle that Amazon gives us than we do with the people that are fighting for their freedom in these other parts of the world. And so if you say, do you care about people, being killed by empire in Palestine or Lebanon or Iran, they'll say yes. But if you ask them, like, do you care more than you care about the McRib? That's like a different story. And the comforts and conveniences, like, I'm not accepting myself from this. Like, this is something that like we are produced this way, and we can't just easily leave these modes of thought, but it actually makes us unable to understand why people would so strongly believe in something bigger than themselves. If I were to bring in my Nietzsche expertise, I might even ask whether, what we're seeing in West Asia is evidence that like God is not dead globally, at the very least, in the sense of like,
and history is not over.
Right. That like these structures of meaning are actually still working for some people, despite an incredible knowledge of science, of technical expertise. And I think that's also part of what especially throws the Iranian diaspora, which is overwhelmingly secular, if not atheist, for a loop, is that like we have just been seeing nonstop, 40 days, 100 waves, as you once corrected me, not 39, 40, it just has that ring to it. And we have just seen Muslim excellence. Like this idea that Islam is backwards, that societies that don't have as firm or a Western idea of a separation between church and state, for example, like even that framing, right? Like the idea of secularism, Naveed talks a lot about this and has helped me. Naveed Zarin now, our friend, has helped me come to some of these same conclusions. But I think we have this idea that you can't actually be a brilliant engineer or just be really smart if you also believe in God or in Allah enough to put your own life on the line. Like, what kind of sucker in our secular, individualist, materialist framework, what kind of sucker would make a martyr out of himself? And here is a culture where actually being a martyr is the highest thing you can be. And you guys must have seen this, the clip of Danny Danon, the UN ambassador.
Danny Demon. His real name.
Yes. I always think of yogurt because of his name changed. It's French yogurt here. But
French yogurt company.
Ambassador Yogurt, he goes, there's so many great quotes from this because he's just crying. He brought in a little drone and he's like telling as if he's actually making a sales pitch for this endogenously produced technology. He's saying, you know, by the time you hear it over your head, it's too late. Which I'm like, oh my God, like put it on a movie poster. I'm there opening night. Like that is the level of shock and awe, to appropriate a phrase, that the technical capability, the mastery, the strategic planning, the sheer rational, logical thinking of supposedly irrational Muslims has evoked in even Israelis who I think, like, you know, surely like it could not get more fanatically anti-Muslim than mainstream Israeli society, but even they have to admit that like these are not people we can portray as cavemen, and because they're kicking our asses with technology better than we can wield it.
Yeah,
and
something we were
and I think
not
it's like
prepared for.
information, like we have to understand like satrapy and Parsi, and I want to throw in William Dalrymple here because Adnan was talking about how there was this industry of Orientalists, and what I say is like before they sent us their like mid-white guys to colonize us, and then they sent us the same guys back to like explain colonialism to us. And what you can see the dividing line is these guys will support Iran, they'll support Palestine, but they will not support resistance. So they don't ascribe a self to these people fundamentally unless they become like them, until they become essentially white, because a self has the right to self-defense, and that's the one right that's not extended to Iranians or Palestinians or anybody else. But that's part of the information warfare that goes on, people like satrapy, which is it's used to frack these societies, to break them apart for resources. And you can see in the Soviet Union it kind of worked. There were people within there who thought, well, life is better there. As in what Fukuyama said, he said the end of history would be VCRs and blue jeans and rock and roll. And he dismissed Islam as a failed ideology, and he dismissed communism. He said, well, we're the only one left standing. And I think this is kind of like the end of history now, when Islam is saying, no, like we've weathered much more worse crusades than this, and this is just sort of the latest crusade. That's for you, Adnan. This is just the latest crusade that we're going to get through. And then communism is also saying like, wait, we're the most populous country in the world and it's working pretty well over here. But that thing about like blue jeans, rock and roll, that's very much the satrapy thing. That's the story. The idea that you could get material benefits from subscribing to this political whatever ideology, this Marxist
and
word I'm missing there.
Yeah.
It's this secular, sorry, I just want to make this point really quickly, that it's precisely this secular idea of cultural freedom as the most important thing that makes this sort of attraction. I mean, Iranians call the US the Great Satan, and it is a sort of demonic, satanic temptation to want this sort of what we consider to be a cultural freedom that really comes at a cost of material plunder of the rest of the world.
And there was a period where that fracking was working, that ideological fracking was working. Yeah. Like there were the reformists within Iran who were like, let's negotiate with the Great Satan, even though Ayatollah was like, bro, I've told you guys, like it doesn't work. But like constantly government after government was trying. And then like young people who do get seduced by like blue jeans and rock and roll. But now you can see the ideological shift with like the Lego videos Benji loves so much. But like the ideological shift has like completely moved such that you actually like look like a lame if you're trying to like support the empire now. And it's way cooler to be with resistance.
Oh man, this is a great week. I found this 7 kilos bag of Lego in my garden.
That's not what I thought when you said 7 kilo, but okay.
Yeah, I thought maybe you were recycling some enriched uranium or something.
Right. Yeah. We need to go in and you need to go in and take it out, as Milikovsky would say. But one thing is really telling about, the psychological, you called it the pathological need to underestimate the other side. I just call it white supremacist mind disease. And but you see it in the behavior of Danny. I loved, but I was raised on Danone yogurt, so I'll call him Danny Demon, right? So Danny Demon at the UN, showing that drone and going, can you believe what they're doing to us? We can't even hear them. It's horrible. Everybody must know. This from the guys who actually pioneered the drones with machine guns on that would broadcast baby cries so that the humans who actually live in Gaza would go out and rescue the babies. This from the people where, this demonic laughing joker type character, Alex Karp, explains that technology is for the benefit of everybody, but also to kill the bad guys. And by the way, this is, this lavender and where's your daddy, AI contraption being used to target the whole families in Gaza. And when the opposition gets, it's not even parity, right? We're still in asymmetric warfare, but gets to that kind of level of technology you can't defend against, right? It blows their mind. And then what you see are literally emotionally 5-year-olds going, you know what they did to me? I mean, I've been beating them up the whole time and pulling their hair out and sticking pins in their arms, but they punched my face when I wasn't looking. Incredible. This is the white disease for you guys. And on the other side, you have civilization and this idea you talk about, individual freedom, but I think it rings hollow to most of us today. What do I gain from driving around the street with a fuck Trudeau flag on my car, right? I tell you what I gain from driving around the street.
They'll take away your banking rights.
No, that's nonsense. You can do it. You can even drive around with a Palestinian flag on your car, and you just get nice smiles from most people.
I think that the important part here is that the Western mindset elides entirely the question of imperial plunder, of the global class divide. And like once you understand the order of operations, that I think is really just like that's the meaning of saying imperialism is the primary contradiction, right? Is to say like, yes, cultural freedom maybe is very nice. Like I've heard non-individualist interpretations of individual sovereignty that are not in and of themselves implausible to me. But what I do find implausible is the idea that anybody could champion something like police and prison abolition or liberal cultural freedom as a first priority when we live in a world, where we have to be able to actually prioritize anti-imperialism over this sort of general resistance to all state repression, which arguably is just a resistance to all states in general. Like that's a very long-term priority, no matter what your politics are. I mean, maybe unless you're a liberal and you really don't want to talk about the fundamental reason why you can't have a liberal democracy that benefits people in Iran, even the way that whatever our complaints, we have a liberal democracy that ultimately, in terms of what it has provided for us, in terms of its control over resources, benefits us. And, to say like, well, let everyone vote. What's wrong with that? It's like, let me count the ways. And obviously we don't have time to get into a whole critique of liberal democracy, but I think people do just want to cut and paste these frameworks onto the other side of the global class divide, the global racial color line, without acknowledging that these very privileges that we are seeking to universalize, to have whatever flag you want, to be able to listen to whatever music, and like music never really hurt anyone, but like it's the point of caring more about that than the things that really matter in life. That's the problem. And we live soulless, materialist, consumerist lives. We're not really in a position to dispute that in the West. And so I think that that's something that we have to really be critical of, is this impulse to a false universality that doesn't acknowledge imperialism and ultimately, the class nature of it. A lot of the more left wing, even left of people like Nargis and Valley, tends to focus on saying, let's stop the executions, only addressing political prisoners as like valid subjects. And then like everybody else, like supposedly is a silent majority secret sympathizer. supposedly in this narrative. But, you know, I think that what we've actually seen is the Iranian government sort of present itself as the legitimate defender of not only national but regional sovereignty. And maybe that's like the last thing that I would maybe usher us to think about with regard to Islam, is that this probably doesn't get talked about quite enough, that how cosmopolitan, or I don't know if that's the right word, but how internationalist the Islamic Revolution actually is and was, and how central that is to the idea of decolonization in this case. You can think about it in terms of the Islamic Ummah. If you're more secular like me, you can think about it as a sort of regional anti-imperialism, but I'm not the one fighting, so I'll let them define the terms. But sometimes in the Western diaspora, in this attempt to appeal to liberal cultural norms as a sort of vision for what Iran should be, they present the Islamic Republic as being sort of so religiously intolerant that they're actually, you know, exacerbating things like ethnic and religious tensions that were previously, you know, peachy. And what you've actually, I think, see when you dig into it more, or even just ask people, is that minorities like the Azeris, like Arabs, they viewed the Shah and the monarchy as the Persian supremacist force in Iranian society, not the Islamic Republic. In fact, Azeri children, for example, used to be punished for speaking Turkish in school under the Shah, like indigenous boarding schools here on Turtle Island. And this, you know, there's been progress in, you know, destigmatizing it on some level culturally, but it's certainly not something that is sort of a project of the Islamic Republic to exceed the bounds of what's necessary to just nationalize a state, right? And to just have a unified nation state. They're not culturally cleansing people, because ultimately what matters is to them Islam, and Islam has tolerance for a lot of other religions, not all of them, and you know, we can talk about that a different day. But the idea, I think, of an obligation to people in Gaza, people in Lebanon, that goes beyond the national and any specifically national sense of sovereignty and national and interests, is also a big part of this global view, to understand that as long as we are segregated into still the white Western countries, more or less, and the rest of the world, that we have to functionally understand our sovereignty in broader terms than just saying, well, what if we just made peace with the imperialists, as a lot of people say? What if we just did diplomacy? What if we said war is the worst thing ever, and we'll just, you know, nothing is worth war, so we'll agree to ultimately, in principle, whatever it is that the imperialist world wants, just let us be happy, just let us be like Dubai, right? And we've talked about this, and of course the idea of Dubai is somewhat dead in Iran. But I do think that that's something that you also can critique once you have an anti-imperialist view, once you have a sort of broader Islamic revolutionary view, is this idea that actually we do have to think about our neighbors. We do have to think about how the global power relations affect us, and not just work out the optimal relationship with whoever the global hegemon is at a given time.
Yeah. Well, where you ended up there is an interesting point about, is war the absolute worst thing? And if you take that as a principle, how does that condition all your other politics? And it reminds me of the very end of Lara. She has a book that I interviewed and discussed with her yesterday on office hours, that famous interview, you know, with this British journalist and Ghassan Kanafani, where at the very end of it, you know, Kanafani has basically said, well, talk about what? With whom? You know, like he keeps saying, but just talk. And he says, but how are you going to tell this to, you know, a people who have been dispossessed, scattered to the winds, subjected to violence? Like, you know, and he says, well, at least you wouldn't be dying. You know, like there would be peace. There could be peace, and at least you wouldn't be dying. And he said, but that doesn't mean anything to us. Like, that's not the end goal for us, that, oh, we might be barely surviving and subsisting without dignity, you know, bare life, as it were. Like, if you want to think about it in those Agamben terms, like Giorgio Agamben's bare life, right? Just mere existence. That's not enough. And the other points that, you know, about this kind of wider sort of political vision and sense of community and how sovereignty works beyond the nation state paradigm that has been imposed upon this region as a result of European colonialism and the emergence universally of the nation state system as the only legitimate way to organize yourselves politically, and the, you know, ideology of nationalism that rationalizes that, you know, very kind of structure. That brings us to making a connection and talking about, you know, Lebanon, which we, you know, want to talk about, and the relationship with Iran. And so we're going to move there because we should talk about it. And I will just point out that people could listen. I had a very interesting conversation with Yaqub Ahmed about history, and we talked about ummatic kind of horizons in this particular moment. So people might enjoy that conversation. And also, as we're getting into Lebanon, I just want to recommend that, you know, we had a great conversation recently, like last Thursday, with Laith Marouf about what's happening in Lebanon. So that is a good background, you know, for what we might discuss now. But before we get into that, we should remind you that, and Benji, if you could paste, you know, the link in the chat, private chat, I'll post it here for people. But I just want to remind people, in addition to liking and sharing and subscribing, I don't think we have as many likes as we have viewers online. So do something about it, folks. And the other thing is, you know, please support Dahnun Mutual Aid in Gaza. The link, I put it in the chat. It's in the video description for their Instagram page. But also Benji wanted to talk about an appeal, particularly since, as a result of my saying that, you know, Hezbollah's,
the well-known firebrand Adnan.
Yeah, there is that, the, you know, in introducing that we should talk about Lebanon, you know, I said there's been a lot that's been happening. There have been like really amazing kind of like,
and you name one organization that shall
and I
not
said,
be
yeah,
named.
exactly. So, you know, instead of saying, as I often do, the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, I actually said the other word that they're known by, which isn't usually a problem.
No, I think it's fine. I think it's when you say it on a long stream, it's fine. What happened is we excerpt it, and then that hits a different audience who's immediately like, narc.
Yes, that's right. So, but at any rate, as a result of that, At Indications, which we normally are streaming on as well, has suffered a YouTube strike. And so that has affected the fundraising. So Benji, tell us about fundraiser.
And it's particularly heartbreaking because it was the week that we had planned with brother Ibrahim in Gaza to fundraise for him and his family. And Ibrahim is the person that I was put in contact with when I set up my first fundraiser on his advice, not for him, by the way, for Omar. And then I set up 4 more, including his. And and then the week before that, for, you know, in commemoration of Nakba Day, we did Lifeline for Gaza, which is an absolutely great platform because it gives you the opportunity to target the money you send to those people who have had least donations over the past, you know, whatever time. So that's great because, you know, your money goes to people who really need it. And so it agreed that we would promote this fundraiser this week. And then because Adnan is such a extremist, of course. I mean, you're the most mild-mannered commenter in the tanky sphere. It makes absolutely no sense. I mean, they could have struck me or Indi, 1,000 times over you. And
well, what's ironic
be
is
you.
that we were talking, I think it was either that episode or a previous one about, that like
Yeah. The greatest irony is the title of that short, which was actually machine extracted by Substack and sent directly. And yes, I use AI this way. I can just yap more. And was Befriend People in Gaza. That was the title of the short because it was
They don't like that.
Sister Asia. You said this thing. We've had lots of impressive stuff coming from the south of Lebanon, from this particular organization. And the rest of it, you see, I'm very careful with your podcast here. And then Asia was saying, guys, befriend people in Gaza. I've done that, and they need also friendship, not just money. Anyway, so Ibrahim was in such a situation because he's always looking around this community to see who he can help, that he didn't even have enough to buy anything new to his children for aid, which is a very important thing to be able to do for your kind of, a dignity as a parent towards your children. So if anyone can hear me and donate to Ibrahim, really, it would be absolutely wonderful, because that is one selfless individual. I've told the story before, but I'll tell it again. When he heard about the health troubles of my partner, he literally said, look, Benji, take money from the fundraiser if you need it. And he wasn't the only one who said it. Also, Omar was another one I'm fundraising for. And, it both melted and broke my heart that they would say this. And of course, I wouldn't touch a penny of their money, but just the fact that their first reaction was, hey, take from this, says so much about their humanity. So let's just honor Ibrahim's humanity, brothers and sisters, and donate, because what little we can do, apart from yapping here around the cooler table or reposting whatever it is you repost on Twitter, and I hope none of it is defeatist propaganda, by the way, we also need to materially support resistance. And today, existence is resistance. So we can support it materially if we're too cowardly to go and actually join the long line of Westerners that have been hardened by Laith Marouf lately, who actually went to West Asia and joined the actual resistance.
And you can see there's a lesson in this strike. What I say is these sort of strikes is the closest in our business we get to an award. But you can see the material aspect of
wear it with pride. We'll do it on our t-shirts. One strike.
But you can see the material aspect, right? Like you can, because we're on these Western white platforms, and you can see what they're telling us to say. If you say what's within the lines, then we'll reward you. If you don't, then we'll starve you. And that's the system of cultural production writ large. And I think you in your way can sort of break that system with whatever imperial surplus you have, which we all have, by donating to Ibrahim and to the other fundraisers that I think it's very important that we do on these podcasts. But it's important to understand that system of cultural production, because you can see it in front of you now. You can see who gets to eat and who gets to starve. And any Persepolis, all that stuff, those are just examples of that system of cultural production, which is a system of reproducing their own power.
I've put it a couple of times in the chat. I've just made a donation myself. Let's reverse. This was supposed to have been a week of fundraising, so let's see if we can make up some of what was lost to help support Ibrahim. I would love to see 10 people from this stream make a donation, no matter how small, and then post here that you've done it. That will, really be, as well. One of the other things that's accomplished by this, besides the material support that is absolutely crucial and vital, is recognition, remembrance, feeling of solidarity. It is a big emotional boost for people in Gaza to know that they are not abandoned and forgotten. And it means a lot, even if it's a small donation. They recognize that people still care about the issue. And we know, of course, there's so many causes. Today I was actually earlier this week, I had so many calls from organizations that I used to support, out of liberal type feelings of guilt for I think after Amnesty International published the apartheid report on Israel. I was like, okay, I'll actually support them because like they've actually taken a courageous position there. And I did so for a few years.
They got you, Adnan.
They did. Médecins Sans Frontières, I gave to them over time, etc. You know, about 2 years ago, I stopped all of these and I just put my money into Gaza, into these fundraisers, Dahnoon Mutual Aid, Samir Project, Lifelines for Gaza, individual things. And, you know, now I've been just receiving all these calls. Will you come back on it? I said, well, what's your position on, like, you know, Palestine? Like, what are you doing for Palestine? And, you know, it's a sort of litmus test now. So let's do what we can now. This was supposed to be this last week. But just for the reasons that, you know, Indi mentioned, that there is this kind of economy. Who gets approbation, you know? Well, those who are promoting and defending people in Gaza, they get the strikes on these social media. They suppress, you know, when we try and repost these and share them and say, hey, everybody give, that gets under the suppression, under the algorithm.
Yeah, and appeals from Gaza themselves on Twitter, for example, are systematically hidden and classed as spam. You know, like there is literally the algorithm just, you know, silences them in the most inhuman way.
Yeah, and I'm really gratified to see that some people are posting that they're donating. So let's keep that up and we'll check in on it again at the end, and hopefully we'll have made a dent. It was at about 10,000. Let's see what we can do. But okay, so this was all as a segue over to this kind of idea of solidarity and connection beyond the nation state, which is something that is really, I think, extremely threatening to the nation state and so-called international community, international state system, etc., is the fact. And remember when Saddam Hussein sent off a couple scuds towards, like, you know, Palestine, Israel, and said, like, well, I'm occupying Kuwait according to you, but, you know, what is Israel doing in the West Bank and Gaza? And everyone said, oh, you can't, no linking. George H.W. Bush was like, no linking. But it did link, because what did he do after the end of the first Gulf War? Is the Madrid round started, and he ended up not being reelected despite being a triumphant winner of a war, right? What U.S. president wins a war and doesn't get reelected for a second term after doing that in their first term? Well, you know, they believe that they suffered consequences of putting pressure on Israel to actually come to negotiations and recognize the PLO as a, you know, as an organization that would represent the Palestinian people, and that they would have to, like, negotiate with them. As a result, they feel that they lost, like, a lot of support, and that the Zionist lobby put its weight behind, you know, Bill Clinton, that perhaps was the reason why, what's his name, the billionaire, the crazy sort of billionaire, Thoreau, right?
Yeah.
that was just meant as a way of kind of undermining and punishing, you know, the Bushes, HW. So now we're seeing Iran is explicitly linking, right, the other regional fronts of the axis of resistance together in the umbrella of their negotiations as a condition for any framework for negotiations and ceasefire, and for any final kind of peace agreement, you know, that might come out of negotiations. So we need to really think about what it means for the Lebanese government, that is a proxy government that's put in place by the U.S., Saudis, French, Israel, you know, basically to do a job to try and disarm the resistance, is saying Iran, you know, you have Joseph Aoun, the president, the appointed president, saying, Iran, you know, you have to get out of, like, interfering with Lebanese affairs. They're just using it as a chip in their own bargaining. Like, he doesn't understand. He clearly does not understand how bargaining works, because, as Arakchi said, if we were using it as, you know, if we weren't, like, trying to be solidaristic with Lebanon, we could potentially have settled this situation a while ago. We're continuing to resist the United States because we're insisting that you get a ceasefire, that you be included in the deal, etc. And instead, like, oaf is saying, that like Iran is interfering in their ability to act as a sovereign nation. The act of sovereignty that they want to exercise is giving up their land to an invading occupier, and kind of dispossessing their own people of their land in South Lebanon. So what do you think is happening is at stake here in the geopolitical kind of relationship? And kind of what remarks do you have about this kind of sense of solidarity that I think is pretty unique in the maybe Cuba sent people to go support like resistance in Angola, but we have not had an example of this kind of solidarity at the nation state level for other people outside of their citizens in a long time. It's quite interesting and impressive how this is foiling the kind of imperialist plans for the region.
Along with the technical stuff, the expertise, the engineering prowess, I think the regional solidarity is also something that people were cynical about. Folks like Valley Nast, in fact, it's almost, again, another precondition of talking about Iran professionally in this context, that you sort of you present their solidarity with other, if you don't call them proxies, you at least present solidarity with them as an instrumental thing to imply that even if they have some independent, autonomous existence, Iran would sell them out or throw them under the bus the moment it became strategically beneficial to do that. And that's obviously not been the case. It's another reason why it doesn't make you some kind of brain genius to say, hey, Iran would have a much easier time if they just stopped fighting Israel. And it's like, people don't even know that, like, some of the maps of Greater Israel, like, again, this is appealing on just vulgar nationalist terms, but some of the maps of it that people have on their little IDF patches or whatever, like, include parts of Khuzestan, include parts of Iran where I can't remember whether it's Mordecai or Daniel whose tomb is in Khuzestan, but there's one that's in the northwest and there's one that's in the southwest. I think it's Daniel's tomb is in Khuzestan, and they want it. Like, there's some debate about it apparently between religious authorities in Israel about whether that's like the optimal place to take, but it's very clearly not something that you can just make peace with and let lie. I guess Israel is what I'm saying, or the entity. It is inherently expansionist by nature. Its legitimate claim to the land of that region is zero, right? And so any amount of space that it takes, it has to take by illegitimately expanding and continuing to do so, basically until there's nobody left in the entire region to oppose them. That seems to be what they've somewhat accurately assessed. And that's, I think, an additional thing that Iranians have increasingly come to appreciate themselves, right? Speaking of the people that might have been critical of the government and might still be critical of the government. But you guys saw, and I know you discussed the series that Helia Dutapi put together, Hamchanan Minab, or Still Minab. And one of I would say the most remarkable moment of that to me was when they were talking to one of the loved ones of a martyred student at the Shajare Tayyib Elementary School. And I have this quote here. I just want to read it because it almost sounds like something we might say. She says, "We couldn't truly understand it when we saw Gaza on TV showing the children. We couldn't fully grasp it. We'd just watch and move on until it happened to us. We are feeling this pain ourselves now. Now we understand what Gaza and Palestine have endured. We can feel the pain of what they did to their children," meaning the Israelis did to children of Palestinians. And she ends this by saying, "We await the complete destruction of America, inshallah." It's remarkable that it's not like people in Iran wake up every day and just by some sort of Orientalist magic, they understand, right and wrong, and they're, able to tell what their national material interests are. They also feel this same disconnect in some ways because of this world we've created. They feel the same disconnect from people that actually they're very much in the same boat with and have to overcome it, but they do. And this war has really helped to clarify that, I think, for a lot of Iranians that thought that sovereignty was a purely national phenomenon. And I think that that's really powerful. And so my point is to say it's not even just surprising to us. I think in some ways it's surprising to some people in Iran that didn't fully appreciate the vision of the Islamic Revolution for a regional decolonization. People here, though, were definitely shocked when Iran, time and time again in the last, few weeks, has been willing to withdraw, has now, as far as I understand, suspended talks over the invasion of or the continued assault on Lebanon, which I'm always happy to talk more about too, because Rokea's specialty is of course reporting from there. She's also one who came from the West or from the East, depending on how she was in Australia for a while, and has now been reporting for the resistance and with the resistance on the resistance and what they're up against. But that was a really important move that I think nobody was really, including maybe the Trita Parsis of the world, nobody was really expecting Iran to hold out for. And now, of course, in this latest statement, which I'm hesitant to read too much into just to not get my own hopes up, but I don't remember who said this, but one of the recent officials said that even to the people in Gaza, to the Palestinians, I believe the language was, "Our fire is at your service. Like, go, come back and fight. We'll be with you." Opinions might differ about when we could have used that sort of attitude earlier, but it does feel very much like the attitude now is that we can escalate also in terms of our demands for a favorable settlement and a lack of an absence of hostilities from the imperialist side even in Palestine. And that strikes me as bringing it back again to Palestine. Like, we can't lose, as we say how regional this is and talk about Lebanon as well, and we should continue to do that. We also, as you do so well, Adnan, and as you guys do in your fundraising, keep the focus also on what even the Islamic Republic, what even the folks in South Lebanon say we are doing this for, which is not just for ourselves, but because Palestine is more than just a strategic question for us. In fact, if anything, it's the thing that we build our whole strategy around is how do we still maintain these commitments?
So Syed Hassan Nasrallah said something interesting. I read it in the book Voice of Hezbollah. He said, "I don't believe in a nation of X thousand square kilometers called Lebanon. I believe in like a broader Islamic republic or like world." But then he talked about how historically this is obviously better for everyone in the region. I think it's not that Iran wants to take over everything in the region. They just want to get America out, as Nasrallah said, like this way. But they want, once you get the occupier out, then people can have their own independent countries. And Israel is very clearly put there to divide and conquer the region. It's a ghetto that Europeans sent their Jews to in order to frack that region for resources. So it is central. Now, if we talk about Joseph Aoun, I think facts have answered him. He was speaking to Christine Amanpour, who said she's another cursed diaspora. After the end of the war in Afghanistan, she said, she bemoaned the loss of human rights, democracy, all coming on the tip of the spear of America, including her paycheck. These people literally live off of war. But so Joseph Aoun is saying that Iran needs to stop interfering. The next day, Israel killed Lebanese officers, not Hezbollah, but Lebanese armed forces officers. I don't know if they did this just because they just don't care, or if they did this because they like to humiliate their vassals. But it's very clear that, the Lebanese Authority, I call it, because I don't know if you can quite call it the government, but the Lebanese Authority doesn't have any authority. Even and then people are like, again, things are changing. They've always tried to tell you that don't fight. Like, we'll give you blue jeans and you can listen to the Ramones, which is also a cursed band. But like, and then everything will be fine, and like you can lose your children to like drugs and hedonism, but don't worry, we'll kill you slower. But that equation has changed. So that equation has changed, and people like Joseph Aoun look increasingly out of time. He's actually arguing against, like from the reports I heard, they were trying to delay the ceasefire, their inclusion in an Iranian ceasefire, in order to have their own direct negotiation with Israel. And it's like, you're trying to prolong a war in your own country, and then the people blow up your officers anyway. So I don't see how the Lebanese authority has any authority left.
I think that's a great way to put it, that they really are. It's just like a puppet institution, like the PA. And this is something that has just gotten dramatically worse, since Aoun and Nawaf Salam came into power. And even power.
And I remember at one point, like there was a Lebanese prime minister, and he's like, Saudi just like disappeared him. I was like, and then he came back later, and I was like,
Habibi.
Yeah. I mean, they really, at this point, what it seems like is they made some cursory attempt to, and there were some instances of this, there were some clashes. They made some attempt to themselves disarm Hezbollah. That was the terms of them being placed in the position they were by the US. But
some of the commanders in the military came out against that, and they were like, no. But
not only that, it's just not feasible either. Like, you can't even, like, they would have to come willingly, really. And like, that ended up creating a situation where the Lebanese government had to make the decision: do you side with Israel or do you side with Hezbollah? Because one of these sides is going to defend Lebanese sovereignty, and one of them is going to attack your country. And I think the calculation they made was that if we can't defeat Hezbollah, we're going to let Israel do it for us. And so Israel has
But Israel is having all these talks because they cannot defeat Hezbollah, and because they're getting, like, as Dan on Yogurt said, like FPVs up the ass like every Sunday. Like,
Exactly. So nobody can defeat Hezbollah, but nobody is able to negotiate with Hezbollah, because what Hezbollah wants is very clear. They're arguing for something that is unacceptable to Israel, to Trump, no matter what he tweets or truths on a given day. And, I haven't been having a little heart attack waiting for these deals to, come to fruition, because it's just so obvious that as long as Iran holds true to these commitments, and as long as the Lebanese resistance continues to, hold so steadfast, this is not going to end in a way that is acceptable to empire. It just seems like,
and if you talk about negotiations, I think it's important to understand, look, Israel is just like a baby Canada or Australia or America. And that's, you were talking about how they want to expand. Like, that's what colonies do. They have to. It's a pyramid scheme, really. But in America, you could ask the Native Americans what negotiations mean. Every treaty was systematically violated. Exactly. Every treaty is just a way of maybe avoiding fighting for a while to get the people to leave and pretend. But if you don't acknowledge them as human, negotiation requires some level of respect for the other side. And the empire has none. It does not respect Muslims, Arabs, anybody that's non-white, or anybody that doesn't sell out to them and become white. It does not acknowledge those people as human, or as having a self, or having a right of self-defense, or as having anything really to negotiate. So there's no negotiating with these people. But I mean, Ayatollah Khamenei could say this, Nasrallah could say this, but Nasrallah also said, I look forward to the point where this becomes obvious to all. And I think this has become the point where it has become obvious to all. And with Israel, Lebanon, they can have all the negotiations between the Lebanese authority and, let's say, the Israeli authority. But the facts on the ground are that Israel cannot stay on the ground. That even at night, they have night vision drones now. So they can't hold anything. They can maybe go and do a tourist tour of a fort or something, but the guys are not safe there. And they know that. And Hezbollah has escalation dominance now in a way that Israel can't deal with. And the same thing in Hormuz, America can maybe shoot down a drone, or they can bomb a telecommunication mast on Keshem, but that doesn't do anything. Iran has the escalation dominance there. So the negotiations are I think almost for like an internal Western consumption, because like what's happening in the Middle East or West Asia, if you want to call it, is that facts on the ground have changed. And America has lost its basis. It's lost its moral basis. And Israel is on borrowed time. It's a matter of time before they withdraw. And God willing, the Radwan force like marches into Al-Quds.
Yeah, I know I've been yapping a lot, but I just want to add this one more thing about the idea of disarming Hezbollah. You know, the quote from Biden in maybe the 80s or something, where it was like, if Israel didn't exist, America would have had to create it. Yeah. Roque had talked to somebody in one of her columns a couple months ago, a woman in one of the villages in the South, who said that if they did disarm Hezbollah, we would have to create a new one. Like, there's no way to, kind of like how there's no eliminating the resistance in Palestine. If you got rid of something called Hezbollah, the resistance that they represent would be right there also again.
One thing I think we need to consider is, what does escalation mean for us? And, you know, there was this thing this week, I think it was already a matter of fact, but it looks like it's going to become a matter of law. There was this thing in front of Congress which completely integrates the US military with the Zionist terror gangs, which I will never call.
They also get some benefits when they come back. They also get US military benefits.
They also have that. They will get veterans benefits. And and then people will go, yeah, well, that's just to prove that the government is Zionist occupied. First, you can't occupy occupiers, right? You can't settle a settler colony. It's like the French Quebecer, pretending that they are being occupied, or even the N-word of North America, because they are being such victims of the Anglo settlers in Canada. And it's the same kind of beef between the Mizrahi settlers in occupied Palestine and the Ashkenazi settlers in occupied Palestine. None of them can occupy one another because they're all a bunch of effing settlers, right? So drop that silly talk of Zionist occupied government. The empire is Zionist because Zionism is one of the forms of imperial, settler, genocidal imperialism. And it's there for a reason. It's at this place for a reason. In 1840, it's a great article in, I hate to, publicize them, but on the Verso, blog by Andreas Malm about the bombing of Akka by Lord Palmerston at the time, by the high-tech of the British being those steamboats, right? Those steamboats, cannon things, and they actually they did a Haza on Akka, right? And this was over a commercial dispute with the Pasha of Egypt over cotton mills, believe you me. And then Lady Palmerston, who was some kind of religious nut, started or joined this kind of Zionist, because the U.S. settlers believed they were the original settlers of Zion, returning to whatever New Jerusalem, whatever nonsense people cook up when they go and settle lands, and not just settle lands, but genocide the native population. And she said, and she wrote letters to her husband, who was to become prime minister later, saying it would be really good to have a colony of Jewish people in historic Palestine to look after imperial interests. And that is a fact. And, it's there's been this debate about, is it the dog or the tail? And I've come to the conclusion a few months ago that it's a case of a inhuman centipede, right? Probably somewhere in a basement on Epstein Island, there is a special kind of genetically modified experiment to turn the empire into this two-headed, four-legged, four-armed, and this is maybe why the Hindus are so in love with it, because it looks a little bit like those Hindu deities with all the arms and everything. But it's one thing. and that doesn't mean that our siblings in Palestine don't have a right and aren't legitimate to go after Jewish occupation of their land, because almost every single settler who's ever killed anybody in occupied Palestine since 48, since the British went out, has been a Jew or pretending to be a Jew or given a kind of Jewish permit just to go and shoot people up, like a lot of Russians and Ukrainians are apparently able to do. So, but when we think about escalation, then we need to think about one thing, because if you're living in a settler colony and you pretend to be against the colonization of Palestine, then you shouldn't be against the occupation of your government by the Zionists, you dum-dum. You should be against the occupation of native land by settlers, by the settler societies that you are a part of. This thing stops with land back on Turtle Island, land back in Australasia, land back in New Zealand, and of course, and probably first, because that is the big strategic economic lock, land back in Palestine. But it won't stop with Jews, and it certainly shouldn't stop with us, genocidal settlers going, oh yeah, well, the Jews, you made us do that. Why don't we genocide you a little bit or whatever? This land needs to be returned. These settler colonies cannot continue to exist, because at the end of the day, why is Israel held by settler colonies or those countries that have actually spawned the settler colonies? Because those, whatever they call the US, the US of KKA, the KKA NADA, and the Australia KKA and the New Zealand KKA thing are successful Zionist projects at the end of the day. And so, they just want to help the last kid on the block. It reminds them of their youth, and they've always wanted their kids to grow up and be like them. And, if this thing stops, it needs to stop not just in occupied Palestine, but all over the world. Our indigenous siblings whose land have been stolen, whose culture has been defiled, need reparation, but not just, acknowledgements on your effing emails, but real change of political and economy in the settler colonies. So that's the kind of escalation that we in the West can do something about, instead of just going, we can't do anything, and I've already donated twice. By the way, thank you very much. More than 10 people have donated tonight. Thank you, Brother Adnan, and thank you, siblings, for your generosity.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that people like Satrapy or all those people, I guess, connecting it back, they're fundamentally loyal to empire. They're the loyal opposition within what we call white empire, and they're trying to get the rebellion to it back inside. And I think Israelis are kind of like rightly confused that they get condemnation from the West, because when Ben Gvir talks about hanging political prisoners, well, Abraham Lincoln did the largest mass hanging in American history of Native people. If they're like, well, keeping people in Gaza, in West Bank, why do you say that's bad? Because America put people on reservations and then like death marched them across to Oklahoma and so on. And Canada, Australia, they're the most sanctimonious about it. But like in Australia, I think until quite recently, they were hunting Aboriginals for sport. So Israelis are kind of confused. And I think Jews are testing if they have the final white privilege, which is committing a genocide and getting away with it. And they don't. But that's an important point Benji makes, because he's connecting to something Leith has been saying, which is that like they have to fight Zionism there. But it's not on them to like contextualize in terms of, we're fighting the bigger empire and we need to talk about that. But the people within the empire, you actually can fight the empire directly. And you can fight the manifestation of this empire where it affects you. And I can say, look, as a Sri Lankan, the place I'm sitting on now, I think this was occupied by the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British, and then effectively now the Americans in quick succession. And to us on the bottom of this empire, like, what's the difference? Like tail or hoof or like ear or mouth, like we're still the dog is biting us. It's one empire to us.
Yeah, I'm glad that I didn't have to be the one to bring up the whole let's be nuanced about, Zog or whatever.
Dude, we're past that. We're like a few months past that.
Yeah, because I study fascism and stuff, so it's a little hard for me to be like anti-Semitism isn't real, Jews are white. But I do think that and I'm not saying anyone here is saying that, but I think that like that is that idea of land back is an important thing to acknowledge. I think that if you believe that Israel has done a single thing that white people haven't done before and wouldn't do again, given the right circumstances and incentives and maybe cultural context, I have a bridge in occupied Brooklyn to sell you. Like, I think that that's a fundamental form of apologia for white Christian supremacy to pretend, people genuinely believe the things that they say, but I think that it is simply not true that there's something specifically Jewish about the forms of domination that are being practiced in Israel. In fact, they are specifically European and modeled not on Jewish culture in the European context, but rather on actually like Christian supremacist right-wing forms of domination. And maybe, there's obviously also some nuance to that. But in general, I think it's a lot easier to understand why it is that the United States does have a national interest in, for example, global hegemony. If you see it in this broader context, rather than thinking, oh, we're engaged in support for Israel because we've been duped or because we've been occupied, as if like the petrodollar and the entire system that makes us the wealthiest country in the world were just like a side effect of the Jewish-run, Israeli-controlled global order.
May I say something on one thing you said? You maybe to bring some nuance to the position, or just make my perfectly clear. There is something specifically Jewish about the current Holocaust in occupied Palestine. It's not Jewish as you would have known it before that weird monster called Zionism, fell off the rotten tree of white supremacy very near that fruit of the rotten tree of white supremacy called Nazism fell off, right? But there is something very specifically Jewish about it. It talks about, it uses the book, which one is it? The book of Job or whatever. Justin had a great program about it as literally a kind of genocide manual, all these Hamelech can kill their children. And when you look at occupied Palestinian settler society, the numbers of the charts, like there's close to 70% who believe you should kill women and children of your enemies, right? I mean, of the charts stuff, I'm not saying it's not happened before with settlers. Like we've had this, a good Indian, as they used to say, is a dead Indian and all the rest of it. We've had this before, but it's wrapped in this specific Jewish form. It would be like saying these evangelical lunatics are, who call themselves Christians. They are really Christian. You get into, I think it's the no true Scotsman fallacy really quickly there. It's not Jewish because the true Jew wouldn't do this. We've had all sorts of arguments like this also on the left. And no, it has to be owned up. There was some guy on Substack whose name is totally Substack handle is unpronounceable, has actually done the research and looked at the numbers. And in the US alone, it's found that 97% of all institutions that have got any link to Judaism in their name or whatever, be they religious or civil, support Zionism and therefore the genocide in Palestine. When you look at the views of Jews, in places like Australia, 98% of all Jews are very strongly emotionally attached to the settler colony in occupied Palestine. And they do it in the name of what they think is their Judaism. So that is very specifically Jewish. It has to be owned, because if we don't say it on the left, we leave a boulevard to the, Candace Owens and the what's the CIA guy's name again? Oh, Tucker Carlson.
Tucker.
And all the rest of it, because they're not afraid of saying this kind of stuff. And if they are Jewish comrades, I don't even know what Jewish means anymore. I mean, it's nonsense. Like some people will say, I haven't practiced the religion for we haven't practiced the religion for 3 generations. We're out of it, but we're still Jewish. So how do you define yourself? Like my grandfather was a Catholic before he renounced the faith, and his son, my father, was raised as a secular person, and so was I. And I would never identify as a Catholic. It would never cross my mind. Oh, so Jews will go, yeah, but we are very special because we've been persecuted for 2,000 years.
Yeah, but what if being Catholic got you land in Rome, man? Then you could be. There's people that don't believe in God, but they believe that God promised them land.
And it's true that they've been persecuted, but now they've also, I think Holocaust has been committed in your name. So if you define yourself by persecution, past persecution, because now, socially speaking, you are not facing any kind of discrimination. If anything, you're rather, you're part of the advantaged classes in the belly of the beast. I don't know if being Jewish gets you ahead, but it never is a problem on your resume, right? If you want to take your past persecution as part of your identity, fine by me, but you have to also own up to the present Holocaust as part of your identity. And if you don't like this, brother Jews, go and fight the fucking genociders that have hijacked your identity. It is not our fight. It is not for us to preserve your identity. It is for you if it means anything. I don't give a flying F if the Catholic identity disappears tomorrow, never to be seen again. And to be frank, I don't give a flying F if the Jewish identity disappears tomorrow, never to be seen again. If it bothers anybody, go and fight your institutions and leave the Palestine Solidarity Movement alone with your nonsense talk of anti-Semitism, which should really be left to the history books and to the imagined futures that you have been genociding people for 140 years in the name of, right? And this is the typical white thing, because I can imagine you doing not even worse, equal to me that I've been doing to you for generations. I'm going to kill you. F you with that.
But it's a fantastic trick though, right? So Europeans genocide Jews, and then they use Jews to do European stuff in Palestine, but we can't talk about it because Europeans genocided Jews. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's like Hitler was their antichrist who died for their sins, and then like white people can sin forevermore because Hitler, if there's a leader of Israel, it's Hitler, because that's the moral basis of their society. That's what they always like refer back to.
Yes. But I think that's a great
look,
point.
as a Sri Lankan, it's got like nothing to do with me, like what Europeans did to Jews. I've only seen what Jews have done to other people, and honestly what they do in my own country now. And like, so I can talk about Americans, I can talk about Europeans, I talk about white people, and I don't think Jew needs to be a protected word anymore. It's not my problem. I mean, as Mohammed al-Kurd said, it's not my fault the Jews took my house. It's not my fault the Jews, like literally they occupied half his house. It's like he said, it's not my fault that they're Jews.
Right, but he would also say that as an educated public intellectual with reach in the West, like you're in a different position he is than somebody. He's trying to explain from the perspective of people that don't have the platform that he has, like why it is that people would blame Judaism, because frankly, the only people that have ever attacked them have been Jewish people. But I think there's a lot done wrong in the name of like, look, that ideology can be held accountable. Like these things are not forever. And I don't think we need to like protect it anymore. Well, I think we might disagree. So let me make this point. I think that there's a question of emphasis. Like if you say specifically Jewish, I might say to do a riff on the Chinese socialist market economy, we might call it colonialism with Jewish characteristics. I'm okay with that. But when you say they're doing European things in Palestine, that's, I think, the right frame, and not doing Jewish things. There's no history of Jewish people committing genocide, that's a Freudian slip, committing genocide in previous scenarios where they've been minorities in European societies. This was all a tool of Christian supremacy. I think that it's precisely a risk from a strategic standpoint, from a tactical standpoint, for people to separate these concepts, to talk about it in terms of this is Jewishness manifest in Israel, rather than this is colonialism that Jews have sort of been given a DEI opportunity to make up. They're doing a little makeup test way later than anybody else was allowed to take the exam.
Yeah. And you can see, like this is what empire does. Like, I mean, satrapy is also, I keep referring back, that's an example of that. They find the craziest members of your community, or like the worst people, and then they feed those, and then they encourage that, and then that can take over your country. And with Israel, like Zionism was a fringe belief, but then sorry, those are peacocks. But Zionism was. I've been wondering.
I was like, these are very large and angry cats.
No, yeah, they sound like cats. They're actually kind of pests. I think it's right above me. But so they've taken Zionism, which is this fringe belief, and this is a classic sort of British really thing. My wife studies at, it used to be called the Oriental Institute in Oxford, and now they've renamed it Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, which will have to change again. But there were a lot of like educated people devoted to basically, forget my language, but mind fucking the natives with their own mythology, which is what they sort of did with Zionism. But that project is pretty damn complete, right? Like they pretty much cooked that, like across the community, across the world. They pretty much, like, there's wide support for genocide now, and it's hard to say like what's left. I know there's some Torah Jews in Brooklyn and so on who say that this is an abomination because the Messiah is supposed to establish Israel, not like Lord Bloody Palmerston and Balfour, like in not the Great Satan. But I don't know, like what light my
it is in the Torah, isn't it, that Judaism is a sort of a diasporic religion in and of itself, that the idea of a state actually contradicts Judaism. And I'm not some big cheerleader for Judaism. I do think that for all of its faults, though, a lot of anti-Zionist Jews are part of the Palestine solidarity movement. I'm not saying we have to spare their feelings,
but they're not part of the resistance. That's where they draw the line as well. There's no, I think there's maybe one person who joined the resistance.
Because the worst thing is, if you say Judaism is an diasporic anti-establishing of a Jewish state religion, which is true historically, but today it's not the case at all. You know, like 97% of all synagogues in the US support Zionism. So then you find yourself in this weird position where you say, no, well, the 3% are the only real Jews, and we are being asked to decide who are the real Jews and who are the fake Jews. It's not my... And someone in the chat said, I'm telling Jews to defend their identity. I'm not telling anybody to defend any identity. I don't have any beef in those identities that I'm saying. I don't care if the Catholic identity disappears. I don't care if the Jewish identity disappears, but don't come in the movement, don't especially not lecture Palestinians about how they should speak about their oppressors. That's what I'm saying. And, and there is the fact, like in Germany, there were 10,000 people who took up arms against the Nazis. In France, my grandfather took up arms against the Nazis, and a few other, tens of thousands did. No Jew that we know of. There is this guy from a sect that is kind of Jewish. I forget the name now, but it was in the PFLP. He was in jail for 20 years in the occupied terror gangs jail, but not a single settler, not a single Jew recognized as a Jew by the others has taken up arms against the that thing. I won't call it Nazi because it almost demeans our Palestinian siblings that we have to refer to this white-on-white violence, as they call it, that happened in Eastern Europe. Not a single one has taken up a gun against the fascists amongst themselves, and that I'm sorry, Kuma, I have to say, but I don't know history perfectly. Seems to be a very specifically Jewish thing.
Fair enough. I think we might have to disagree. What were you going to say, Indi?
Oh yeah, no, I gotta go. Thank you very much. It was nice meeting you, Kumars. Thank you again, Adnan. Sorry about
wonderful. Have a good one.
I think we're ready for a Lego video. So it'd be great that you could join us. And I think we're coming to our conclusion. This has been a continuous topic, this last one. So I'm glad, Kumars, you've had a chance to engage in it as well as somebody who studies, the intertwined kind of relationship between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in the medieval West. It's very hard to ignore that it was a real phenomenon, but that, of course, Zionism is a particular stage in appropriating a way of trying to solve the Jewish question that made an alliance, just as others were saying, of ending the kind of subordinate and hated and marginalized position of the Jew in European society by conditioning their inclusion into political society as Europeans with their settler colonial project and domination, adopting a form of nationalism that resurrects a kind of ancient, pre-Islamic, pre-medieval identity, and like it does with all these other kinds of nationalisms that, whether it's Iranian nationalism in the kind of monarchist sort of frame that said, we're really these Achaemenids and Sasanians, and we've been like invaded by these Arabs, and they don't belong here, and Islam and all of that is some deformation of what it meant to be an Iranian. Or what they say in India, like, in Hindutva, this kind of other religious nationalism is that, well, Islam came with these Turkic, conquerors, and, it's like a colonialism as bad or worse than what the British did, and we need to resuscitate this ancient, true identity. So I think, Benji, you're right when you say, like, this is a dangerous game, this kind of attempt to construct an identity on the basis of some kind of ancient past that is imagined, and that is a warrant for kind of remaking society through this unity and purity kind of discourse, that we have to get rid of all the impure forms and distortions, or that people who converted to a different religion than the one we're saying is our original identity are essentially cast as traitors, right, to the nation. So this is what was being harnessed by Zionism, which is this old story of European nationalism, of racial and ethnic kind of purity. And that is why it's become so confused for people, to reconcile the situation of historic anti-Semitism that has existed, that the right wing is always ready to appropriate for their own kind of contemporary politics of purification and, and so forth, with, the actual kind of working out historically of this bargain, this unholy bargain that has kind of, led, the European acceptance of the Zionists, right? The Jew transforms into the Zionist, settler, colonial, figure.
The deal with the devil turns you into a demon.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, this is, of course, why I think having a long sense of history helps you put these things into perspective, and you can both affirm that there was this historic reality, it's had consequences on the modern world, but what it's being used for now is to justify the transformation of Jews into the fascist settler colonial nationalists that Zionism as a project was the solution, not the solution that we should all have equal rights, that maybe we should, get rid of the kind of political significance of these different identities that we might have, that we speak one Yiddish or we speak, Roma, or that we, kind of like, have this religion or that, those should be immaterial to our political rights and our equality. Instead, the solution to the Jewish question here was, let's colonize Palestine, right? So you have to become crusaders in order to become true Europeans. You have to commit genocide in order to be part of the community of nations. This is what Spain is. Why is Spain part of Europe? Only because they liquidated by forcible conversion, genocide, and expulsion their religious others, right? This is what it meant to become part of the West. So we're dealing with that legacy. It's something that we have to acknowledge, but we also can't, let it be used against us now, when we have to clarify that it's a different situation now. Zionism has changed the whole calculus, and unless Zionism is rejected, and unless settler colonialism is rejected, that's why I really appreciate, Benji, you coming back to the fact that, politically speaking, we inhabit these spaces, many of us in settler, colonies that just happen to have been more successful. This is the last one we're witnessing, and it's being contested. There is resistance. Unfortunately, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, South Africa is also another one that was contested and it was defeated. And of course, it was the closest ally to Israel. Why? Because they're both settler colonial projects, that were trying to persist in the post-war period. But, so, we have to kind of really think about what it means to decolonize our own societies, these like settler colonies that, managed to, nearly eradicate the indigenous people in these lands. But at any rate, let's see if there is one of these delightful.
So may I say a few words to introduce it?
Yeah, tell us.
I think something was very interesting. First of all, if you haven't watched it, go and watch my interview with the Lego guys on Pascal Lotta's channel. It's also on our YouTube, I think, and Substack. But these guys are just an autonomous. They're part of the Mosaic resistance, right? They're not a state operation. They're just a bunch of university friends who started putting out those videos. I think they started around the 12 Days War and really going to their stride with the new aggression, right? And very interesting, after the, whatever you call it, the ceasefire, they started putting out those Lego videos that went for universal peace, that were trying to speak to the heart of the US public and saying, look, we all want peace in this world and all the rest of it. And by the way, they're doing this great project online, right? If you go to their Twitter, you can plant a Lego flower in the memory of one of the imperial wars. I just did it. You get the name of the martyr you're planting the Lego flower in memory of, and there's a big Lego thing that with flowers. You can also donate if you want to, but you don't have to plant a flower. So that's a really nice little thing that they're doing. But speaking of escalation dominance, the latest video they've put out, and which is the one I linked to, is very different from that future Kumbaya phase, if you like. And it's you'll see it's something very cutting. It's about an incident that happened in Iran recently, where a Mossad agent was actually sniffed out and snuffed out, if I understand the circumstances, though I didn't see it other than in the video, so don't hesitate to correct me. And it's basically, saying, okay, you know that Trump, that tweet Trump you put out about no more Mr. Nice Guy? Sounds like the time has come for something like this, right? But we're going to be doing it. So very interesting, the change of tone, even of those videos. And I'm pretty sure we'll all know in 20 years that those guys are not direct, propaganda agents of the Iranian Islamic Republic, which, by the way, I would have absolutely no problem with. So I'm not saying it to kind of say there, any It's just my sense of them. So anyway, you'll be able to see this. Before we do that, thank you very much, Kumar. It's great that we get to have different positions on this show. That's absolutely not a problem for anybody here. And it was great to have you.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah, I loved it. And I also want to thank from the bottom of my heart on behalf of Ibrahim, his family, and all the people he helps around him. I know it's so many. For the 19 donations, last I looked, that came from Brother Adnan. Adnan, when you say it in your voice, it has so much more of an impact than when I say it in my, kind of broken, croaky.
I think I just emphasized it
French,
and said, "Look,
French." I sound like a peacock. I sound like a Sri Lankan peacock. The French are arrogant roosters.
No, it's just re-emphasizing the point and saying, we can do something here about it. And I'm very proud of this wonderful community that we've built with these, Iran versus the Epstein Empire collaborative series. Wonderful chat, great comments. Fantastic discussion, and also
I forgot one point. Sorry,
heart is in the right place. I mean, there are some trolls we got, have to always police them. But by and large, this group and this community has made a statement. There's at least 19 people who started since we made the firm appeal to support Ibrahim.
One of those. My main point I didn't make. There was a punchline to my old point. The fact that they went after the ceasefire for, look, we can all have a kumbaya future, actually speaks to the deep humanity of Iranian civilization and reminds everybody that it's life versus death, literally. And they even said it in the video. They said, yes, we want peace, we need peace, but we need to defeat this enemy because we know, everybody senses it. It's the forces of death versus the forces of life. And life is an imperfect thing and it has different forms in different places. And we're not here to judge life. We're here to defend it because it's threatened by that genocidal empire.
Absolutely. And just on a lighter note before we play the video is that we did get a few mentions of the Crusades in. It's very important that we always make sure to do that. And we have one comrade in the chat at Herscheld 1853 who said at the very beginning that every time that he hears the mention of the Crusades, he does 10 push-ups. And I told him, you are going to get a workout if you come onto the stream. And now he said his arms are sore. So yes.
Mashallah.
We're not only, dropping truth bombs and keeping up our anti-imperialist solidarity and spirits against defeatism and psychological warfare. We're raising money for Palestine and we're helping you get the exercise you need, people. So we're doing it all, But speaking of those who do it all, these have been so fantastic, these wonderful Lego videos. So I do want to bring that up onto the stage. And actually, gosh, I'm wondering, where is that tab, actually? That's interesting. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. So let's see if we can get this going from the beginning.
Full screen it. Stop.
Yeah.
Short and sweet.
You see that? telephone number on there. 972 reminds me of a place.
Oh, it reminds me of like a certain zip code. A certain telephone area code. Yes, which that one was worth, because it was so short and so punchy. It was and a lot was packed in there. It was worth watching twice.
I think they have 6 Easter eggs in there. I didn't find them all. There was the Handala sticker.
The Handala sticker, that was very evident, and the bottom of the truck. Yeah. Amazing. These are just, people will be unpacking these for generations as resistance literature. So
at least 20 PhDs in the making there.
Theses for sure. I hope that I will get a chance to supervise at least one on this and have a student. So people out there, if you want to study and do a dissertation deconstructing and analyzing the Lego videos, apply to my university. I will support your entrance. Okay. I don't know if you'll get a job afterwards. I mean, not in the Western Academy anyway. But anyway, I want to thank you, Kumars. It was just really wonderful to have you on. We'll definitely have to have you come back on. It was a lot of fun, not only great insight, but also a lot of fun. We enjoyed it, I think.
Oh, yeah. It's been a hoot and a half. I would love to come back.
Yeah, terrific.
And we should have you as well, Benji. Next time Adnan comes on, delete your account, or we do another collab. Would love to have you along for the
anytime, guys.
Let's do it. Okay. Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here in this community. All the people who are watching, people who put their comments in the chat. Before you go, if you haven't already, you can like the stream, make sure other people get a chance to see it, share it, and make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, go subscribe to Delete Your Account on your favorite podcast platform. And of course, Resistance is Fertile on Substack, and at Indications channel, which hopefully should be restored now. I think we've gone on long.
The channel is still on. We can't post on it. That's all. But you can still go there and like and subscribe and do all the things.
So make sure to go do that. And so until next time, and I do want to announce that we are having an exciting, I was going to talk maybe a little bit about the World Cup and Iran's team, but we are having a special World Cup stream next Tuesday, and I have to thank Benji tremendously for putting us in touch with Abu Bakr Abed from Palestine, from Gaza. Every major tournament, Guerrilla History, the other podcast that I'm involved with, Henry and I always do a kind of major tournament kind of discussion, both because we love football, but also the geopolitics of these international tournaments is really interesting. And we usually have Alex Avina on, but I've discovered that Indi follows football. And of course, Benji made it possible for Abu Bakr Abed to come on, and so we're going to have a roundtable discussion on Tuesday, this upcoming Tuesday, so look out for that and join us to talk about the worst World Cup in history, and it hasn't even started
since
yet,
the 1936 Olympics or something, right?
Right, exactly.
Where every group is the group of death.
Fantastic. All right, everybody, thank you. Peace with justice and solidarity to you all.
And free Palestine, and swifter still victory to the free people of the world.
Amen.
Amen.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.